Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when Keanu Reeves, Hollywood's quiet philosopher, sits across from Drew Barrymore, the eternal optimist of daytime TV, and the conversation turns from kindness to politics? It starts softly. Drew, glowing with her trademark warmth, laughs as she asks, "Do you think both parties are failing the average American?" She expects a thoughtful, balanced answer, maybe something vague about unity, but what she gets instead leaves the room silent. Keanu's eyes darken just slightly. He leans forward, voice low but steady. "I think both parties stopped listening a long time ago," he says. "They talk about helping people, but they mostly help themselves." The audience shifts in their seats. Drew blinks, trying to smile it off. "You really think it's that bad?" she asks gently. Keanu nods. "People are tired, Drew. They're doing everything right and still falling behind. That's not politics failing. That's leadership abandoning." The laughter that filled the room moments earlier fades into a heavy stillness. Drew, caught off guard, leans in ready to push back, but there's something in Keanu's tone that demands respect. What begins as a friendly talk show chat turns into a powerful, unexpected clash about faith in leadership, truth, and whether America still belongs to the people living it. What happens next leaves even Drew speechless.
The set of the Drew Barrymore show glowed with its usual warmth. Soft amber lights, pastel decor, and a studio audience that adored Drew's gentle curiosity. She leaned toward Keanu Reeves, a steaming mug of tea in her hands, still smiling, but her tone carried more intent now. "Keanu," she said, trying to bring a lighter tone back, "I think people know our system isn't perfect, but don't you think there's still a lot of good being done? You can't just write off both parties completely." Keanu looked thoughtful, his hands clasped loosely on his knee. "I'm not writing them off," he said quietly. "I'm saying they've written off us, ordinary people, the ones who work 2 jobs, raise kids, care for parents, and still get told to wait for progress that never comes." The audience murmured in agreement. Drew glanced at them, then back at him, her smile tightening. "But that's a bit cynical, isn't it? There are people in both parties trying to make change. Maybe not enough, but they exist." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Good intentions are like movie scripts, Drew. Everyone says they're working on one, but if you never shoot the film, it doesn't mean anything." The audience burst into laughter and applause. Even Drew smiled at the analogy, but pressed on. "So what's your alternative? Just walk away from the system? We can't all be rebels." Keanu replied, "I'm not saying rebel. I'm saying rebuild, rethink. Stop pretending that 2 sides of the same coin represent choice." His tone wasn't angry. It was measured, reflective, the kind of delivery that made people lean in. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to wake something up. Drew crossed one leg over the other, her expression soft but defensive. "But isn't it easy to criticize from the outside? It's always harder to fix things when you're actually in it." Keanu nodded. "You're right. It's easier to criticize. But sometimes the only people who can fix something are the ones who aren't trapped inside it." The audience clapped again, though more hesitantly this time. Drew was well-liked, and her viewers didn't enjoy seeing her challenged so directly. But Keanu's calm made it impossible to dismiss his words as aggression. "So, you don't trust either party?" asked Drew. "I trust people, not institutions. Institutions serve themselves. People serve each other." Drew sighed softly, her empathy shining through. "That sounds beautiful, Keanu. But people also make up institutions. If you lose faith in them completely, how do you rebuild anything? At some point, you need a structure." Keanu's eyes softened. "I agree, but a structure only stands if its foundation is honest. And right now, honesty is the one thing politics can't afford." The studio fell quiet. Even Drew seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Then she leaned in again, voice gentle but insistent. "I think there's still hope, though. Don't you?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Hope's the reason people keep showing up, even when they're disappointed. But hope without accountability is just endurance." That line landed hard. The audience applauded, a few people standing briefly. Drew's eyes widened, realizing how deep this conversation had gone. "Keanu," she said, her tone softening, "I love that you care. I really do. But I think people also need grace. Change takes time." Keanu looked down, then back up at her. "Grace isn't the same as excuses." Drew blinked, momentarily stunned. The audience murmured again, half in admiration, half uneasy. The tension was no longer hostile. It was philosophical, human. Drew tried to ease it with humor. Okay. Remind me not to argue politics with John Wick, she laughed. Keanu chuckled politely, but the fire behind his calm hadn't dimmed. I'm not fighting, Drew, he said softly. I just think we've stopped asking the right questions. Instead of which party is better, maybe we should ask who's actually listening. The audience applauded once more, longer this time. Drew smiled, nodding, but her eyes hinted that this conversation wasn't finished. She glanced at the cameras, her voice bright but steady. All right, we're just getting started. Don't go anywhere, because after the break, we're going to dig deeper into what Keanu really believes America needs to heal. As the lights dimmed and the applause echoed, Drew exhaled. Keanu simply sat back, serene as ever, the kind of calm that made everyone else question their own certainty. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be small talk.
When the cameras came back from the break, Drew's smile had the same trademark warmth, but her eyes carried the focused edge of a host who knew the tone had shifted. The audience sensed it too. The laughter that filled the studio earlier was replaced by a quieter kind of anticipation. Drew leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Keanu, before the break, you said the system's broken because it's not honest. But honesty in politics is complicated. Everyone wants it until it hurts their side. Don't you think that's just human nature? Keanu took a sip of water before answering. Human nature's complicated, yeah, but that's why leadership matters. Leaders are supposed to rise above nature, not sink to it. A small murmur rippled through the audience. Drew nodded slowly. But how realistic is that? We expect politicians to be saints, then crucify them when they fall short. Maybe part of the problem is us, our expectations. Keanu's expression softened. Maybe, but we also stopped expecting integrity. We treat it like a bonus instead of the baseline. That drew a round of applause. Drew didn't interrupt, but she tilted her head, her expression hinting at a counterpoint. You talk like someone who's seen it all and lost faith, but don't you think losing faith makes people stop trying? If everyone gives up, the only ones left running the show are the corrupt ones. Keanu's voice stayed even. I haven't given up, Drew. I just don't buy the illusion anymore. People mistake optimism for progress. They're not the same. Drew smiled widely. So what do you suggest? A revolution? He chuckled softly. No, just a memory. Remembering that these people, politicians, billionaires, media hosts, they work for us. Somewhere along the line, they made us believe it was the other way around. The studio broke into applause again, louder this time. Drew let it ride for a few seconds before cutting through with a calm but pointed tone. You're including me in that list? Keanu looked her straight in the eye. You're part of the media, Drew. That's power. Power to tell stories, to frame truth. That matters. For a split second, Drew's smile faltered. Then she caught herself and leaned back, her voice steady. I've always believed in using my platform to inspire people, not divide them. I think you do that, Keanu said kindly, but inspiration without discomfort doesn't change anything. It wasn't an attack, more a reflection, but Drew felt the sting in it. She let out a quiet laugh. That sounds poetic, Keanu, but people don't always want to be uncomfortable. They just want to feel good, especially after everything this country's been through. That's the problem. We keep treating comfort like medicine when it's really a sedative. The crowd reacted audibly, half gasps, half applause. Even Whoopi Goldberg, sitting in the front row that day as a surprise guest, raised her eyebrows. Drew tried to pivot, sensing the heat rising. Okay, let's ground this. You're saying both parties are corrupt, that people need to wake up, that comfort's the enemy. But what does that actually look like in action? What would you do differently? He thought for a moment. Start small. Teach kids that critical thinking matters more than loyalty. Teach adults to listen without trying to win. Vote for people who tell you the truth, not what you want to hear. Drew nodded slowly, almost respectfully. That's beautiful, but you're describing something idealistic. People are tired, Keanu. They're struggling. They want hope, not homework. He gave her a gentle smile. Hope without homework fails every test. The audience laughed, then cheered. Drew smiled too, but her voice was more serious when she continued. You're not wrong, but I think you underestimate how much people already carry. Not everyone has the privilege to sit back and dissect the system. Some are just trying to survive it. Keanu's tone softened again. You're right. Survival's noble, but survival shouldn't be the national dream. That line hit hard. The studio was silent for a moment. Drew inhaled deeply as if recalibrating. You sound frustrated with everything, but frustration without direction can turn dangerous. Don't you worry that your message might feed into more division? Keanu shook his head slowly. Division doesn't come from talking about broken things. It comes from pretending they're fine. The audience applauded again, louder than before. Drew smiled, though her eyes looked slightly distant, thoughtful. I admire how much you believe in truth, but you also have to believe in people's capacity to change. Otherwise, all this, conversation, art, democracy, it's meaningless. Keanu looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I do believe in people. That's why I'm still here. The applause came like a wave. Drew looked at him, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. Respect, maybe? Or recognition that this wasn't a typical celebrity interview. Still, she pressed on, her tone steady. You know, Keanu, people tune in to feel hope, to seek connection, and I think they're seeing that right now, even if we disagree. He smiled. That's what makes America beautiful, right? We can disagree and still share the stage. The audience cheered, and for a moment the tension eased. Drew exhaled, smiling sincerely. All right, we'll take another quick break. When we come back, I want to ask Keanu something personal, why he still chooses to believe in this country, despite everything he's seen. The applause swelled again as the cameras faded to black, but behind Drew's composed smile and Keanu's calm demeanor, something deeper was building, a conversation that was about to cut closer to the bone.
When the cameras came back, the lighting felt slightly dimmer, more intimate, less stage-like. Drew crossed one leg over the other, her posture relaxed, but her eyes stayed on Keanu with quiet curiosity. The audience leaned in. Everyone could sense this next part would be different. Before the break, Drew began softly, "You said you haven't given up on America. I want to know why. Because honestly, it feels like a lot of people have. They're tired. They don't trust the system, the media, the leaders. What makes you still believe?" Keanu sat back for a moment, letting the silence breathe. "Because I've seen what happens when people stop believing," he said finally. "My dad used to tell me, when good people go quiet, the bad ones get comfortable." The audience murmured. Drew nodded slightly. "That's powerful. But doesn't that belief hurt sometimes, when you keep expecting better and it never comes?" He smiled faintly, but his eyes were heavy. "It hurts all the time, but that pain's proof you still care." Something in his tone hit Drew. She looked down for a moment, her usual brightness dimmed. "I get that. After everything that's happened in the world, pandemics, politics, division, there are days when I just want to shut it all out, pretend it's fine. You're human, but pretending doesn't heal anything. It just delays the moment we finally face ourselves." Drew looked back up, her voice steadier now. "You sound like someone carrying more than frustration, almost like grief." Keanu hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe it is grief. For what we've lost, decency, connection, trust. For the fact that we've become addicted to outrage." The crowd went silent again. Drew's voice dropped to a whisper. "That's true. Outrage is the only emotion we know how to share now." Keanu leaned forward. "Yeah, outrage makes us feel alive, but compassion keeps us alive. We forgot that difference." The audience clapped softly, not the explosive kind from before, more thoughtful, almost reverent. Drew's eyes glistened slightly under the lights. "You know, I think that's what scares people most. We're losing our ability to listen without fighting." "That's the heart of it," Keanu replied gently. "Both sides think they're fighting evil, when really we're just afraid of being ignored." There was a pause long enough to feel heavy. Drew glanced toward the audience, then back at Keanu. "Do you think we can fix it? Or is this just where we are now?" Keanu sighed softly. "We can fix it, but not if we keep waiting for politicians to do it. It starts at dinner tables, at work, in conversations like this. Real change doesn't come from Congress. It comes from how we treat the person across from us."
The audience applauded again, and Drew smiled, a genuine, emotional smile. That's beautiful. You know, my mom used to say something similar. She said, if you can't change the world, change your corner of it. Keanu nodded. She sounds wise. Drew's eyes flickered with memory. She was, and she believed in kindness no matter how messy the world got. I think I've been trying to hold on to that. The moment hung in the air, soft, human, almost fragile. The crowd didn't make a sound. Then Keanu said quietly, that's the kind of value I wish politics talked about. Kindness. Not policies, not polls, just humanity. Drew looked at him for a long moment. But that's not what gets ratings, she said, half laughing through the emotion. Keanu chuckled. Maybe that's the real tragedy. We'd rather be entertained than awakened. That line drew nervous laughter from the audience, but Drew didn't look away. Her voice softened again. You know, I think people would listen to you, Keanu. You speak like someone who's seen the worst of the world, but still believes it can be better. That's rare. He smiled faintly. Belief's not the problem. Memory is. We forget too easily. Every generation has to relearn the same lessons. Don't let greed run your country. Don't let fear run your heart. Drew exhaled slowly, visibly moved. That's exactly it. And maybe that's why I love having these conversations on this show. Because even when it's uncomfortable, it reminds people we're still allowed to feel. The audience applauded again, warm, emotional. But behind that applause was a subtle undercurrent of tension, as if everyone knew this calm couldn't last. Drew leaned in just a bit. Her voice was careful now. So let me ask you something harder. If you had to choose between hope and truth, which one would you rather give people? Keanu didn't hesitate. Truth. Because without it, hope's just decoration. The air in the studio shifted. Drew blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness beneath his calm tone. That's a powerful line, she said softly, but also a little heartbreaking. He nodded. It's supposed to be. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. Drew leaned back, exhaling as the applause began again, rising slowly, like a wave building before it breaks. And beneath that quiet tension, one thing was clear. The conversation had stopped being about politics. It was about the soul of a country and the people trying to believe in it again.
The applause faded, but the weight in the air didn't. Drew glanced toward the cameras, clearly aware they were running long, but she didn't seem to care. You know, Keanu, she said softly, I think people watching this at home feel the same exhaustion you're talking about. They want honesty, but they're scared of what honesty might mean for their side. Keanu nodded. That's the paradox. Everyone says they want truth until it threatens their comfort. Drew looked down, tapping her pen against her cue card. That's fair, she said, but don't you think both parties have become so protective of their own power that they've stopped listening entirely? Keanu hesitated, then said, I do, but I also think the problem isn't just politicians. It's us. We keep rewarding division. Every time we share outrage online, every time we cheer for our team and boo the other, we make it worse. The audience reacted, some with quiet agreement, others with uncomfortable shifting. Drew looked out at them and smiled nervously. He's not wrong, she admitted, but isn't that just how democracy works? Debate, disagreement, it's part of the process. Sure, Keanu said, but debate without empathy isn't democracy, it's performance, and we've turned it into theater. That line hit the crowd hard. The audience clapped, but it wasn't cheerful. It was the kind of applause that says, he's right, and it hurts. Drew's tone sharpened just a little, almost defensive. But come on, Keanu, you make it sound like everyone's complicit. Some people are just trying to get by, raise their kids, pay their bills. They can't fix what Washington broke. Keanu nodded slowly. You're right, they can't fix Washington, but they can stop feeding the machine. The moment people stop treating politics like a sport, the game ends. The tension spiked again. Drew leaned forward, visibly more animated. That's easy to say from your seat. You're not out there depending on policies that actually affect your life. People can't just opt out when their health care, their schools, their futures are on the line. Keanu didn't flinch. I'm not saying opt out. I'm saying wake up. Stop waiting for someone in a suit to save you. They won't. A low murmur spread through the studio audience. Some clapped, others frowned. Drew looked genuinely taken aback. That sounds kind of hopeless, doesn't it? He tilted his head. No, it sounds honest. We keep acting like the system's broken, but what if it's just finally showing us what it's always been? Drew exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. The conversation had moved far beyond its original topic. So what then? If both parties are failing, if the system's rigged, if the outrage machine's too big, what's left? Keanu's eyes softened. Us, that's what's left. People who still remember how to be decent when nobody's watching. There was a beat of silence, then Drew's voice cracked slightly. That's poetic, but it's also terrifying, because it means no one's coming to fix it for us. He nodded. Exactly. The crowd clapped again, but Drew stayed quiet, looking at him with an expression caught between admiration and discomfort. You know, she said finally, you're not what people expect when they hear your name. You're not cynical, but you're not idealistic either. You sound tired. Keanu chuckled softly. I am. I think most people are. We're tired of being told we're on opposite sides when we all want the same thing, to matter, to be heard, to live with dignity. Yeah, she said, her voice low now, and maybe that's what this whole argument comes down to. We keep blaming politicians, but maybe the real question is, are we still capable of unity? Keanu thought for a moment before answering. We are, but we've got to stop mistaking noise for action. Every protest, every viral clip, every fight, it feels like change, but it's just release. Real change is quiet. It's personal. The studio went silent again. Drew's expression softened. You make it sound like we've forgotten how to be human. Keanu looked right at her. Maybe we have. That line hit like a punch. The audience gasped softly. Drew stared at him speechless for a moment. That's heartbreaking, she said finally. It is, but the good news is we can remember. It starts when we stop shouting long enough to listen. The audience broke into applause again, louder this time, but Drew didn't join in. She seemed caught in the moment, studying him like she was still trying to process what just happened. After a long pause, she smiled faintly. You know, I didn't expect this conversation to go here, but I'm glad it did. Keanu smiled back, a little weary but genuine. Me too. Drew turned toward the cameras, her voice softer than usual. We'll take a short break, but when we come back, I want to ask Keanu one last question that I think might surprise him. The music swelled, the lights dimmed for the commercial cut, but as the audience clapped, there was no mistaking the look between them. Two people from completely different worlds, suddenly realizing they'd stumbled into something raw and real. And as the cameras faded to black, the unspoken truth hung in the air. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about whether America still had a heart.
When the cameras came back from the break, the tone was different. Gone was the light talk show sparkle. The laughter, the teasing energy, it had all been replaced with something more grounded, more human. Drew sat forward, elbows on the table, her voice gentler than before. Keanu, she said, before the break, you said something that stuck with me. You said maybe we've forgotten how to be human. What does that mean to you? Keanu took a deep breath, hands folded in his lap. He wasn't performing anymore. He was reflecting. It means we've traded empathy for opinion, he said softly. We've stopped trying to understand each other. Everyone's trying to win arguments instead of win each other back. The audience fell quiet again. No one shuffled, no one whispered. Drew nodded slowly. That sounds painfully true. He smiled faintly. I'm not blaming people. The world's noisy. We're constantly being told what to fear, who to hate, what side to pick. It's exhausting. But the thing is, underneath it all, most people still want the same things. Love, safety, a fair shot. That's not left or right. That's human.
Drew's expression softened. So maybe the failure isn't political at all. It's emotional. Keanu's eyes met hers. Yeah, maybe we built systems that forgot how to feel. A few audience members clapped softly, almost cautiously, like they didn't want to break the moment. Drew leaned back, exhaling. You know, she said, when I started this show, I wanted it to be about joy, about optimism. But sometimes I think optimism requires honesty, and that's what you brought here today. Keanu chuckled quietly. That's kind of you to say. I think optimism without honesty is just denial. The crowd laughed gently, easing the tension. Drew smiled. You're such a poet, Keanu. He shrugged. I just see a lot of people hurting. And I think we need to stop waiting for someone in Washington to fix it. We fix it every time we choose kindness over cruelty, patience over pride. Drew's eyes glistened. That's beautiful, she said. And honestly, I think that's what most Americans want to hear, not another campaign promise, but a reminder that they still matter. Keanu nodded. Exactly. Politics should be a reflection of people, not the other way around. A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. You could feel the mood, somber, inspired, maybe even a little shaken. Drew clasped her hands together and leaned in, her tone intimate. So, if both parties are failing, if people feel powerless, where do we start? Keanu thought for a moment before answering. At home, with how we treat each other, with how we listen. Real change doesn't start on a debate stage. It starts in living rooms, in classrooms, at dinner tables. We've got to start talking again, not shouting. Drew smiled, her eyes shining. I think you just summed up what half this country has been trying to say. He looked at her with quiet humility. I'm just saying what I hope we all remember. The audience began to clap again, louder now, steady, heartfelt applause that filled the studio. Drew looked around, visibly moved. I think that's the best note to end on, she said softly. A reminder that we can still find each other, even in disagreement. Keanu nodded, then reached across the table, extending his hand. Drew took it immediately. Thank you for being so open, she said. You didn't come here to give a speech, but somehow you gave one that mattered. He smiled warmly. Thank you for letting me. The applause swelled as the camera zoomed out, capturing the two of them shaking hands under the soft studio lights. The audience stood to their feet. No theatrics, just genuine respect for what they'd witnessed. Drew turned toward the camera one last time, her voice clear and heartfelt. If you take anything from today's conversation, let it be this. Real strength doesn't come from the loudest voices. It comes from the ones still willing to listen. Keanu nodded beside her, eyes thoughtful. That's the truth, he said quietly, and the audience cheered again. The outro music began to play, soft, emotional piano instead of the usual upbeat tune. Drew smiled at the crowd. We'll see you next time, and maybe by then, we'll all be listening just a little more. As the cameras faded to black, Keanu placed a gentle hand on Drew's shoulder and whispered something only she could hear. She laughed softly, tears in her eyes. Later, producers would say they hadn't seen a studio that still, that moved in years. And when the clip hit the internet hours later, it went viral, not for controversy, not for scandal, but because people said it felt real. In a time when every argument feels like war, Keanu and Drew had done something rare. They reminded America what conversation was supposed to feel like. If you like this emotional exchange, subscribe for more unforgettable celebrity moments, raw conversations, and stories that make you think. Drop a comment below. Do you think both parties are failing the people they claim to serve?